During the live hearing, Jasmine Crockett took a calm but calculated approach as she began laying out what would become the most talked about portion of the entire session. With a deliberate tone, she turned attention to a lesser-known but deeply consequential international deal involving energy infrastructure. Her words carried weight not because they were flashy, but because they were grounded in timelines, memos, and well-documented facts. Facts that painted an uncomfortable picture. She started by referencing a contract signed just months after a high-profile political figure had left office. A contract worth $1.6 billion and negotiated in part by business associates closely linked to the former administration. The contract, she noted, involved a foreign government and centered on natural gas infrastructure, a sector that had received favorable policy treatment in the final year of the administration. Crockett wasn't simply tossing out accusations. She outlined a timeline first. The passing of energy-friendly regulations that opened up access for U.S. companies to operate in foreign markets with fewer restrictions. Then, the quiet establishment of a private firm. Just weeks before that, administration ended. And finally, the signing of the billion-dollar deal, the ink on that agreement drying just as the public's attention shifted toward a new presidency. She posed a question to the panel and to the American people watching. If a policymaker that spends 4 years shaping international regulations that benefit a specific sector, and then his close associates sign a deal in that exact sector shortly after he exits office, are we supposed to believe that's just a coincidence? There was no immediate answer. Some members of the committee shifted in their seats. Crockett didn't flinch. She continued, pointing out that the deal hadn't been front-page news and hadn't been flagged by any major ethics watchdog. She noted how the complexity of the arrangement spread across shell companies, law firms, and international holding entities, effectively buried it under legal paperwork and public disinterest. But the paper trail existed, and she referred to Department of Commerce memos and SEC filings that, when lined up chronologically, showed a pattern: regulatory doors opening under specific leadership, followed closely by private profit flowing to individuals with direct ties to that same leadership. Then came the deeper implication. Crockett asked why there had been such intense public focus on financial dealings of political families, particularly the scrutiny around Hunter Biden, when no one was examining this case with the same rigor. Greater than we've subpoenaed emails, text messages, and bank transfers because of a laptop. But we're not going to question how a private company with direct connections to a former administration just secured a deal worth over $1 billion in the very market that administration made easier to access. At this point, the room was quiet. No one interrupted. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice. Her words carried more power in their restraint. She carefully avoided using inflammatory language. There were no accusations of illegality, but what she emphasized again and again was that the appearance of impropriety alone should trigger investigation. Crockett also added that the financial firm at the center of the deal had recently hired 2 former White House advisors in consulting roles, each earning 6-figure incomes. The timing of their hiring aligned with the period in which international negotiations were quietly underway. Greater than we need to ask ourselves whether public service has become a stepping stone to private enrichment, and if so, are we okay with that no matter who's in the White House? That line, more than any, seemed to resonate beyond partisan lines. Some members of the committee, even those from opposing parties, were seen taking notes. The way Crockett laid it out, she wasn't alleging corruption outright. Instead, she used her legal background to present what prosecutors might call a pattern of behavior, the same way one might establish motive, opportunity, and benefit in a courtroom. She walked through the key components without ever needing to point a direct finger. But the implications were unmistakable. The audience didn't need her to name names. They knew who she was talking about, and more importantly, they knew the power that person still held, both politically and financially. Jasmine Crockett didn't just stop at laying out the timeline of $1 billion international deal. She knew that for her words to carry real weight with the American public, she needed to expose the glaring double standard in how investigations are carried out, especially when it comes to political families. And so, with measured precision, she pivoted from the technical breakdown of financial dealings to something far more familiar and widely discussed: the Hunter Biden investigation. Without raising her voice, Crockett asked a question that cut through the partisan fog like a razor. Why is one political family's business dealings considered a national scandal, while another's is simply ignored? She was referring, of course, to the years-long obsession with Hunter Biden, the laptop, the business emails, the foreign board memberships. Crockett made it clear she wasn't defending Hunter Biden or excusing any potential misconduct. What she was challenging was the selective outrage. She pointed out how numerous congressional hearings, FBI probes, and entire media cycles had been consumed with investigating Hunter's business ventures despite the fact that he never held public office. Meanwhile, she noted, a former president, one who had full executive power, controlled federal agencies, and could influence domestic and international markets, had engaged in business-related actions that were barely being scrutinized. Asterisks greater than. We've had subpoenas over text messages, dinner meetings, and laptop hard drives, Crockett said. But when a president's associates directly benefit from policies he pushed while in office, policies that led to $1 billion deals signed after he left, suddenly no one wants to ask questions, and this is where she mentioned Donald Trump by name. Crockett noted how Trump's children, including Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, had held formal positions in the White House. She referenced publicly available records showing that Jared Kushner secured a $2 billion investment from a Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund shortly after leaving the administration, a deal that ethics experts had flagged for potential conflicts of interest. She asked why that deal, involving close family and immense sums of money, wasn't receiving the same level of congressional and public scrutiny that Hunter Biden had faced. Asterisk, you can't scream corruption on one side and turn a blind eye on the other, she said, her tone never veering into personal attack. If influence peddling is wrong, it's wrong no matter whose name is on the bank account. Asterisk, the silence in the hearing room was deafening. Crockett had forced both parties to confront something deeply uncomfortable, the weaponization of investigations based not on justice, but on political allegiance. Asterisk, she also brought up a powerful comparison. When Hunter Biden's name surfaced in emails related to a Ukrainian gas company, there were calls for impeachment, investigations, and even arrests. But when Trump's own family members, while still holding government positions, traveled to Saudi Arabia, China, and other nations and emerged with favorable deals or trademarks, the outrage was minimal, and the questions were quickly buried. Asterisk, we've created two Americas, Crockett continued, one where certain families are presumed guilty until proven innocent, and another where even suspicious behavior is waved away as savvy business. Asterisk, she didn't accuse Trump of a crime that wasn't her goal. What she was doing was more piercing. She was exposing a truth that many in the room already knew but refused to admit out loud. Asterisk, she emphasized that in both cases, whether it was Hunter Biden or the Trump organization, what mattered most was transparency, not tribalism. The American people, she argued, deserved to know whether public power was being used for private gain, and they deserved to see investigations driven by facts, not by whose name was on the ballot. Asterisk, Crockett closed her remarks by challenging the committee directly. She said that if they were truly committed to rooting out corruption, they needed to apply their standards evenly, and that meant asking tough questions about Trump's financial entanglements, just as they had with Biden's son. Asterisk, this isn't about protecting the Bidens, it's about protecting the public trust. If we're only going to investigate one side, then we're not doing oversight, we're doing political theater. Asterisk, her words lingered. And for a moment, even the usual partisan energy in the room seemed to pause, because beneath the politics, everyone knew she had a point, one that couldn't be easily dismissed. Asterisk. The moment Jasmine Crockett's remarks hit the airwaves, they didn't just ripple quietly through political circles, they sent shockwaves directly into Mar-a-Lago. According to multiple sources close to the former president, Donald Trump was not just surprised by what she said, he was livid, and the reaction behind closed doors was more telling than anything broadcast. On the hearing floor, Asterisk, Trump had reportedly been watching the live proceedings in one of the smaller lounges near his private office. Initially, he wasn't paying close attention. After all, hearings like this often play out with predictable talking points and little consequence. But when Crockett began speaking and mentioned billion-dollar deals tied to his associates, something changed. Aide said his posture straightened. He leaned forward. The room grew quiet. Asterisk, as she started laying out her case, tying energy policy under his administration to a massive international deal signed shortly after he left office. Trump's demeanor shifted from mild curiosity to boiling frustration. What made it worse, insiders say, was her calm delivery. She wasn't shouting or accusing, she was simply laying out dates, names, financial terms, and political outcomes with surgical precision. Asterisk, within minutes of her final remarks, Trump allegedly stood up and demanded to know why this wasn't stopped, reportedly berated a senior aide, asking why his legal team hadn't anticipated this kind of questioning. To those present it was clear, this wasn't just political theater to him, this was personal. Crockett hadn't gone on a rant. She had walked the public through a scenario that Trump had worked very hard to keep off the radar. Asterisk, soon after, phones began lighting up in Trump's inner circle. Communications staff, legal advisors, and friendly media contacts were looped in as a frantic effort to manage the fallout began. One insider described it as a code red response, noting that it wasn't just the content of what Crockett said that worried Trump, it was the way she said it. Her tone gave the remarks credibility. She didn't sound like someone chasing headlines. She sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Asterisk, that authenticity made her remarks difficult to dismiss, even for the conservative networks that usually leap to Trump's defense. Behind the scenes, press aides were instructed to neutralize the narrative immediately. Several right-wing commentators were contacted to put out statements suggesting that Crockett's claims were unfounded or taken out of context, even though no one had yet formally rebutted her evidence. Meanwhile, the clip of Crockett's remarks went viral within hours. It was shared not only by progressive accounts but also by independent journalists and moderate conservatives who were intrigued by the legal implications. She hadn't offered speculation, she had posed precise strategic questions. Questions that no one on the committee, including Republicans, seemed eager to answer. Trump's frustration continued to mount as he realized this wasn't just a Twitter thing. By that evening, mainstream networks were replaying the clip and beginning to ask their own questions. CNN ran a segment titled, "Crockett Raises Uncomfortable Questions About Trump's Business Ties Post-Presidency." MSNBC followed up with a panel of legal experts analyzing the timeline she referenced. Even Fox News, known for its loyalty to Trump, ran a brief segment attempting to downplay the story. But the fact that they had to address it at all was a sign that the remarks had landed. The next morning, Trump's team issued a generic statement through a spokesperson calling the hearing a desperate distraction by radical Democrats and labeling Crockett's comments as false and defamatory. But noticeably absent from the statement was any direct rebuttal to the timeline she had presented. No corrections to the policy decisions she mentioned, no clarification about the billion-dollar deal. Some allies suggested Trump should go on the offensive, give an interview, call it fake news, dominate the narrative. But according to those close to him, Trump wasn't eager to put himself back in front of a microphone where he might be asked questions about the deal. He feared giving the story more oxygen. So instead, the strategy shifted to damage control, bury it under headlines, flood the news cycle with unrelated statements, and try to paint Crockett as a partisan distraction. But for those who had watched the hearing, the damage was already done. Crockett had accomplished something rare in modern politics. She had delivered a quiet, factual takedown that triggered a full-blown PR crisis for one of the most media-savvy politicians in American history. After Jasmine Crockett's pointed remarks during the hearing, the conversation began to shift not just in Washington, but across America. What had begun as a standard oversight session suddenly became a moment of reckoning for how the public viewed influence, privilege, and post-presidency profits. The impact wasn't driven by volume or theatrics. It was powered by facts, delivered clearly, and aimed directly at something people from all political backgrounds could relate to: fairness. In the days following the hearing, Crockett's words sparked widespread discussion not just about Hunter Biden or Jared Kushner, but about Donald Trump and the broader question of what public service had become. People began asking whether elected office was still about representing the public or whether, increasingly, it had become a launching pad for elite families to secure private fortunes. Crockett had not alleged crimes. Instead, she invited Americans to look at patterns. A former president, she said, had left office and within months saw his inner circle secure a $2 billion investment from a foreign government. She didn't have to name Saudi Arabia or Jared Kushner repeatedly. People already knew the story. But by framing it within a context of bipartisan accountability, she opened the door to a larger discussion. What's acceptable? What isn't? And are we holding everyone to the same standards? The story found fertile ground online. Thousands of social media users, many of whom didn't consider themselves politically engaged, began resharing the clip of Crockett speaking. Some captioned it with things like "finally, someone saying what we're all thinking," while others focused on her ability to stay composed while delivering information that shook up both parties. And then came the op-eds. Journalists from across the political spectrum, liberals, independents, and even a few conservatives began writing pieces questioning the post-presidency dealings of Donald Trump and his family. Some took issue with how little scrutiny there had been around the Trump Organization's foreign dealings during and after his presidency. They pointed to the continued overlap between Trump's business ventures and political operations properties, where foreign dignitaries stayed, campaign events held at his hotels, and trademarks secured overseas during delicate trade negotiations. Crockett's comments gave legitimacy to those questions. She hadn't attacked Trump personally. She hadn't used conspiracy theories or social media gossip. She had presented verifiable events and let the timeline speak for itself. That approach gave her credibility. It also made it difficult for Trump's defenders to dismiss her as just another partisan voice. But perhaps the most unexpected result came from the public opinion polling released the week after the hearing. A national survey showed a significant spike in the number of Americans across party lines who believed that former presidents should be subject to more rigorous post office financial disclosures. When asked which former president had raised the most concern for them in terms of mixing public duties with private gain, a majority named Donald Trump. That shift wasn't just due to Crockett's testimony, but there was no denying that her words had unlocked a public unease that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface. Many Americans had grown used to seeing politicians enrich themselves after leaving office. But the scale, speed, and international. The nature of the Trump-related deals brought the issue into sharper focus. Inside Republican circles, her comments forced some uncomfortable conversations. A few party strategists admitted, off the record, that Crockett had hit a nerve. One strategist noted that while Trump's base remained loyal, independents and moderate Republicans, especially suburban voters, were growing weary of what felt like a constant blending of business and politics. They weren't sure where Trump, the candidate, ended and Trump, the businessman, began. Crockett's approach avoided direct mudslinging, and that was perhaps her greatest strength. She allowed facts to lead and let others connect the dots, and as a result, those dots began forming a picture that people across the country couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about whether Trump had technically broken the law. It was about whether people believed he had used the presidency to benefit himself, his brand, and his family at a level that surpassed anything the country had seen before. In a political era dominated by sound bites and sensationalism, Crockett had done something different. She had taken on one of the most powerful and polarizing figures in American politics, with a tone that was measured, professional, and deeply persuasive. Jasmine Crockett's measured remarks may not have been delivered with dramatic flair, but their impact was unmistakable. In an environment often dominated by shouting matches and partisan grandstanding, her calm, fact-based presentation stood out. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her command of the facts and the clarity of her questions did the heavy lifting, and in doing so, she reframed a national conversation that had long been skewed by tribal loyalty and selective scrutiny. By methodically connecting policy decisions made during Donald Trump's presidency to financial deals that followed shortly after, Crockett invited the public and Congress to ask harder questions about the line between governance and gain. Her refusal to rely on innuendo or speculation gave her argument weight. Instead, she focused on publicly available information, official timelines and patterns that pointed toward something deeper, a system that too often allows the powerful to benefit without being held accountable. It wasn't an attack, it was a challenge, one that asked lawmakers and citizens alike to consider whether oversight is truly about protecting democracy or simply punishing political opponents. And in that challenge, Crockett found unlikely resonance with Americans across the political spectrum who, regardless of party, are exhausted by a system that seems rigged in favor of the well-connected. Donald Trump's reaction to the moment said, just as much as Crockett's words, his behind-the-scenes frustration, the rapid media response from his allies, and the shift in talking points all reflected one reality. She had hit a nerve. What she said couldn't be brushed off as partisan noise. It was rooted in a truth. Many people had quietly suspected that the powerful often play by different rules, and too few are willing to call it out unless it suits their agenda. Crockett's moment on live television didn't just stir controversy, it sparked a deeper reflection. Why are some public figures endlessly investigated while others are allowed to operate in broad daylight with little pushback? Why do questions about ethics only seem to matter when the opposing party is in the spotlight? And what does it say about our democracy if we're unwilling to apply the same standard to everyone, regardless of name or affiliation? In the end, Crockett didn't just expose a timeline, she exposed a tension at the heart of modern American politics. The gap between what we expect from public servants and what we tolerate. Whether her remarks lead to further investigation or not, they have already served a larger purpose. They reminded the country that integrity in government isn't a partisan issue, it's a democratic one. And sometimes, it takes a voice, not raised in anger but grounded in truth, to make the loudest statement of all.